This is Jake Mitchell, who was too busy on his phone while flying his small plane, and this would end in disaster, and here is his story. The autumn sun painted golden streaks across the small airport's tarmac as Jake Mitchell performed his pre-flight checklist. His red and white Cessna 172 gleamed in the morning light, a Christmas gift from his parents after getting his pilot's license last summer. At 17, he was one of the youngest licensed pilots in the state. "Dude, hurry up with the boring stuff," Marcus called from the passenger seat, already buckled in. "We're burning daylight." "Yeah, man, I want to get to the lake house before noon," Tom added from the back, adjusting his baseball cap. Jake grinned but kept his eyes on the checklist. He'd known Marcus and Tom since middle school, and this weekend getaway to Tom's family lake house was meant to celebrate their last year together, before college scattered them across the country. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably another text from Sarah. They'd been arguing all morning about him canceling their date for this trip. He pulled out the phone, thumbs hovering over the screen. "Control tower to Jake," Marcus teased. "Earth to pilot." "Just a sec," Jake mumbled, typing a quick response. The tower had already cleared them for takeoff, and perfect flying conditions meant this would be an easy hour-long flight. He started the engine while still glancing at his phone, Sarah's angry emoji-filled response demanding his attention. The familiar rumble of the Cessna's engine filled the cockpit as they began taxiing toward the runway. "You know the rules, Captain," Tom said, leaning forward. "No phones while flying." Jake nodded absently, firing off one last text before tossing his phone onto the empty co-pilot seat beside him. "All right, gentlemen," he announced with mock formality. "Prepare for takeoff." None of them noticed how the phone slid forward as the plane tilted upward into the cloudless blue sky. Jake had dreamed of becoming a pilot since his first flight in his uncle's crop duster at age 10. The feeling of soaring above the world, watching farms and roads turn into a giant patchwork quilt below, had captured his imagination. After 2 years of studying, countless hours in flight simulators, and strict training, he'd earned his private pilot's license, the youngest in his flight school's history. But lately, flying had taken a backseat to other distractions. His girlfriend Sarah consumed most of his thoughts, their 6-month relationship a roller coaster of teenage drama. His phone had become like another limb, constantly buzzing with her messages, snaps, and demands for attention. Marcus, sitting beside him now, had been his best friend since they'd bonded over model airplanes in 6th grade science class. The tall, lanky basketball player had supported Jake through every step of flight training, even helping him study radio protocols late into the night. Marcus was headed to UCLA next fall on a basketball scholarship, and these weekend trips felt precious now. Tom, the quiet one of the group, had always been the voice of reason. His family's lake house had become their unofficial headquarters since freshman year, a place where they could escape parents, homework, and girlfriend drama. The straight-A student had already been accepted to MIT, his future in engineering practically guaranteed. Tom's careful nature made him the perfect balance to Jake's sometimes reckless enthusiasm. The three friends had been inseparable throughout high school. They'd celebrated each other's victories, Jake's first solo flight, Marcus's game-winning shots, Tom's robotics competition wins. They'd also helped each other through the tough times, breakups, family problems, and the growing anxiety about their upcoming separation after graduation. This weekend was supposed to be special. Tom's parents were away, giving them the lake house to themselves. They'd planned to spend 3 days fishing, playing video games, and talking about their hopes for the future. Jake had almost canceled when Sarah threatened to break up with him over it. But Marcus and Tom had convinced him that bros came before romantic drama. What none of them knew was that this decision would be their last adventure together. The phone resting in the co-pilot seat would make sure of that, its screen continuing to light up with messages that would prove too tempting to ignore. The Cessna climbed steadily through the morning air, leaving their small town behind. Jake felt the familiar thrill of being in control of an aircraft, his hands steady on the yoke as they reached their cruising altitude of 3,500 feet. The engine hummed smoothly and patches of forest and farmland rolled beneath them like a slow-moving carpet. "Check out those clouds," Marcus said, pointing to the puffy white formations floating nearby. "They look like cotton candy." Tom leaned forward between the seats. "Actually, those are cumulus clouds. They're usually a sign of good weather, but—" He stopped mid-sentence as Jake's phone lit up again, its blue glow reflecting off the instrument panel. Jake's eyes flickered to the device. Sarah had sent 3 new messages. He tried to ignore them, focusing instead on checking his instruments, but his attention kept drifting to the phone. 20 minutes into the flight, he couldn't resist anymore. "Hey Marcus, take the yoke for a sec," Jake said, reaching for his phone while keeping one hand loosely on the controls. "Dude, seriously," Marcus protested, but reluctantly placed his hands on his side of the dual controls. "You know I'm not licensed." Jake barely heard him, absorbed in reading Sarah's messages. She was threatening to go to Jason Miller's party with someone else. His stomach tightened as he typed a quick response, the plane drifting slightly off course. "Jake, we're losing altitude," Tom warned from the back, his voice tense. Got it," Jake mumbled, correcting their descent without looking up from his phone. The altimeter had dropped nearly 200 feet while he was distracted. The next 30 minutes continued this way. Jake would focus on flying for a few minutes, then sneak glances at his phone whenever it buzzed. Each time, the plane would drift or wobble slightly before he corrected it. Marcus and Tom exchanged worried looks but stayed quiet, not wanting to distract their pilot further. "We're coming up on the lake," Tom announced, pointing through the windshield at a silver splash of water in the distance. "Should be starting our descent soon." Jake nodded, but Sarah had just sent another message. This one made his heart race. She'd posted a photo of herself with Jason at the coffee shop. Without thinking, he picked up the phone again, both hands now off the yoke as he typed furiously. The plane lurched suddenly, caught in a pocket of turbulent air. Warning bells chimed from the instrument panel. They were dropping altitude too quickly. But Jake was still looking at his phone, thumbs flying over the keyboard. "Jake!" Marcus shouted, grabbing for the controls. "Wake up, man!" Tom's voice came from behind them, high with panic. "The trees! We're too low!" The phone slipped from Jake's hands as he finally looked up, horror dawning on his face as he saw the treetops rushing toward them. The altimeter was spinning downward, and warning signals blared through the cockpit. He yanked back on the yoke, but they'd already dropped too far, too fast. The last thing Jake saw before everything went wrong was Sarah's final message glowing on his phone screen as it tumbled through the air. "If you don't answer me right now, we're done." The irony of those words would never have time to sink in. The first impact came with a deafening crack as the Cessna's right wing caught the top of a massive pine tree. The plane spun violently, tearing through branches like paper. Metal screamed against wood as the aircraft cartwheeled through the forest canopy. The windshield shattered, spraying glass throughout the cockpit. The instrument panel erupted in a final chorus of alarms before going dark. Tree limbs punched through the fuselage like spears, and the smell of aviation fuel filled the air. Time stretched like taffy. Jake saw Marcus's mouth open in a scream he couldn't hear over the chaos. Tom's baseball cap floated in slow motion between the seats. The phone, the cause of it all, tumbled end over end, its screen still glowing as it bounced off the ceiling. The ground rushed up to meet them. The Cessna's left wing tore completely off, sending the plane into a deadly spiral. Jake's hands never left the controls, though it made no difference now. His last conscious thought was of his mother's voice, warning him about texting while driving just last week. The final impact came with a thunderous roar. The nose of the plane crumpled like an aluminum can. The engine tore free from its mounts, taking the firewall with it. The fuselage buckled, folding in on itself like a closing book. Then silence. Complete and absolute silence fell over the forest. A thin trail of smoke rose through the broken trees, marking their descent like a crooked finger pointing to heaven. Somewhere in the twisted wreckage, a phone screen flickered one last time before going dark forever, its final message still displayed. "If you don't answer me right now, we're done." The forest seemed to hold its breath for a moment, as if in shock at the violence that had just torn through its peaceful morning. The search party found the wreckage 3 hours after the Cessna missed its scheduled arrival time. Smoke from the crash site led them straight to the scene, where emergency workers shook their heads in silent grief as they worked. State investigators arrived by helicopter the next day. They photographed the debris field, measured skid marks on broken trees, and collected twisted pieces of metal that had once been a proud aircraft. Among the wreckage, they found Jake's phone. Its screen cracked, but its data intact. The investigation revealed the truth through the phone's timestamps. In the final hour of flight, Jake had sent or read 27 text messages. The last message was received just 48 seconds before impact. The official report would later state that pilot distraction due to mobile phone usage was the primary cause of the crash. The flight recorder showed that the plane had dropped below safe altitude multiple times during the flight. Each drop matched perfectly with the timestamps of Jake's text messages. The final descent had been too steep and too fast to recover from, even for an experienced pilot. At the local high school, 3 empty desks stood as silent reminders. Sarah transferred schools, unable to face the guilt of her role in the tragedy. The aviation community used the crash as a warning to other young pilots about the dangers of distracted flying. Jake's parents found his pilot's logbook in his room. The last entry, written the morning of the crash, read, "Clear skies, perfect day for flying with friends." They donated his flight training materials to the local flight school, which now includes his story in their safety courses. The small airport where they took off that morning put up a memorial plaque. It reads simply, "Some messages can wait. Life cannot." The tragedy shook their small town to its core. 3 families were left with empty chairs at their dinner tables, and 3 sets of college acceptance letters would never be opened. The high school hallways felt eerily quiet without Marcus's booming laugh, Tom's thoughtful comments in class, or Jake's excited chatter about flying. At the memorial service, hundreds gathered in the school gymnasium. Basketball players wore black armbands with Marcus's number. The robotics team displayed Tom's winning project. Jake's flight instructor spoke about his former student's passion for aviation, his voice breaking as he urged other young pilots to learn from this preventable tragedy. The accident made national news, sparking discussions about phone use in cockpits. Local flight schools added new rules about mobile devices, calling them the Mitchell Protocol in Jake's memory. Tom's parents established a scholarship fund for future engineering students, while Marcus's family created a youth basketball program to honor their son. Sarah started a social media campaign called It Can Wait to warn teenagers about distracted driving and flying. Her posts always ended with the same message: "No text is worth a life." The town would recover, but it would never forget how 3 promising young lives ended because of one fatal distraction.